All yours,
All
bud.
right. So I think a lot about trying to figure out what to show up with you guys, for you guys, whatever, right? My brain is doing interesting things at the moment, but I think about it a lot. Like, what is the most helpful? And the truth is, I don't always know. And I think when you get on here and ask questions, I can totally go where you need help. So jump in and start asking questions even now before I get started, and I'm more than happy to answer when we get there. But I run into this phenomena with couples quite a lot where they are trying to talk through something. And oftentimes, I think I've talked about this before, you have one person who's the pursuer, one person who's the withdrawer. Both are trying to work on connection in the relationship. It sounds funny to sound like the withdrawer is working on connection, but the withdrawer is often trying to keep the peace or keep emotions de-escalated, and that if they keep things de-escalated and calm, that the relationship will stay stable, or that, obviously they won't be called out or um, uh, attacked or whatever, right? But so 75% of the time, I think statistically, the woman is the pursuer, the man is a withdrawer. Obviously, those are heterosexual relationships, but ultimately, when you have conflict in a relationship, you generally have one or the other. Obviously, we can both be pursuers, we can both be withdrawers, but and the most common, though, for us is to have one person be the pursuer, one the withdrawer. But I see people, and I'll encourage people to share the more vulnerable parts of themselves. Like, so I go to my partner and I say, I'm really nervous. I want to open up with you and share, but I'm afraid you're going to pull away. And you'll say something, and the other person, usually the withdrawer, like doesn't give any response. It's like a flat response. Like there's no emotional expression. There's no sometimes there's nothing at all. There's no words at all. It's just blank stare. And what I was working with a couple recently where I said, what's happening right now? Right. Cause I happened to have them both there. What's happening right now? Like, well, in this case, the pursuer just kept talking. There would be enough pause where the withdrawer could say, hey, you know what? Let me ask you about this, or tell me more about that. But they didn't say anything. And so the pursuer is being vulnerable and trying to share and trying to get connection or trying to ask a question. And when we don't get a response, oftentimes we keep talking. And then it becomes this massive amount of information, at least in the withdrawer's mind, right? The withdrawer starts to feel incredibly overwhelmed and is thinking, now you've told me so much, I don't even know what to do. And we've talked about this before, but the withdrawer might be into having shame that, okay, you're telling me all of these things and it must be all my fault and whatever else. And in this particular case, I thought, I wonder how often we don't understand how to transition. You've shared something, let me transition to keep the conversation moving, but instead of it being a dump of information, I can use a transition. And it sounds funny, but I wrote down a bunch of them. So I'm just gonna go through some of them. But if somebody says something, if you're a pursuer and you want to share something, pause. And don't just share what you need to share, which is great, by the way, because you're trying to get connection. Share what you need to share and then pause. or share a piece of what you need to share. Sometimes I've told my clients, like, break it up into chunks, put it into small bites, and what might be a small bite for our partner, for you, is like a crumb or a nibble, right? So I just want to honor that as a pursuer, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this is a bite to you, because I need so much more. And if you are a withdrawer, or you're a pursuer that struggles to know how to transition, where maybe you get a lot of overwhelming information, simple transitions. What is it like to hear me say that? So if I'm a pursuer, I can stop and say, what's it like to hear me say that? Very simple. Hey, I'm passing the baton to you. It's now your turn to respond. And I have these a little bit mixed. So you might hear one be a pursuer transition, one might be a withdrawer transition. So here's another one that's a pursuer. What did you hear me just say? Right? And sometimes I will say something, and the other person's response is maybe way more intense than I would have thought, or they'd shut down or get emotional, and which is fine. Not that emotional is shutting down, but they shut down, or they might get really emotional. And I'm going, your response doesn't match what I thought I was sharing. And so rather than trying to argue about what they should be hearing, I just want to ask them, what did you hear me just say right now? Right? So that's a good transition. Here's another one for a pursuer, I think. This silence is hard for me. Is there anything else you need to say? Or is there anything coming up for you? Right? Just acknowledge the silence, acknowledge the difficulty of it. Your lack of response is hard for me to hear. So there's a transition. Again, keep in mind, these transitions aren't going to make everything perfect, but it is about trying to at least keep it moving a little bit, or maybe taking it a direction where we can focus on something smaller-ish, rather than a bunch of things. I didn't realize you were feeling that way. Can I respond? Right? That's a way of stopping somebody if they're sharing a lot of information. I didn't realize you were feeling this way. Can I respond? Right? Can I ask you a question? That can be a very safe, calming response to hear from somebody. I didn't realize you feel this way. Can I respond? Can I ask a question? Can I comment? That can feel very calming. Another one is, what I heard you just say was, and then I repeat it, and then I ask, am I getting that right? Right? Once again, this may seem kind of basic, but I realize that a lot of my couples need this. And I actually had somebody tell me the other day, what's basic to you is not basic to me or to us. So you guys gotta let me know if this is hitting in the right spot or not. So what I'm hearing you say is there anything else? If I understand you correctly, what I heard was, right? You've got to figure out which ones of these are going to work for you. When I did this thing, right? When I was upset yesterday, I can see that it made you feel scared or sad. Am I getting that right? Another one that I love, I use this all the time, even with my clients. I say, I am confused. Can you tell me more? Or I am confused. Can you tell me what you're trying to say? Because the truth is, I get confused all the time. It's actually a really normal feeling or emotion for us to have. And it gives the other person an opportunity to share more and to know that I'm engaged. Another question I might do is, what does that, that's funny. I said, what does that happen for you? I think I wrote that down wrong. Can you tell me more about that? Why does that happen? I read that wrong. Why does that happen for you? Can you tell me more about that? So there's a lot of times where we might get defensive. Well, why does that happen? Right? But really, if we ask that same question, hey, I'm confused. Why does this happen for you? When this thing, why is this trigger coming up? Tell me more. And then another one I put is, can we slow this down? Can we make this into smaller pieces? And that's a way to say, I'm overwhelmed and I'm not sure I can cover everything. I'm not sure I can track everything. Can we slow it down? So that's kind of the quick list that I created to maybe help everyone a little bit in those tough moments where there's silence, where maybe our partner is saying a lot and we just don't know how to respond. Maybe we feel compelled to just say a bunch and we might not realize we're overwhelming somebody, or that they feel overwhelmed. It's not even that it's our fault that we're overwhelming them. It's just their lack of emotional tolerance, at least for our level. So, Scott, what are your thoughts on that so far? You're muted.
My thoughts are unmuted. I think you're right on target. I actually, some of these lines, I mostly work with male betrayers who are usually the withdrawer. Yeah. And I teach them lines like, let me make sure I heard you correctly. What I heard you say was this. Did I get that right? Okay. And, I think you might be feeling this. Am I correct?
I'm being over dramatic, but I swear that if especially the betrayer can learn that one line, they could save their marriage. Like, and I'm being over dramatic, right? I understand that.
But you're not. I tell guys because they get all defensive. I'm like, yes. No, stop. Don't get defensive.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Okay, let me make sure I understand this.
Yes.
I'm hearing you say this. Am I getting it right?
Yeah. And then you can go to, I think you must be feeling this. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
And it slows it down and it makes it bite-sized. Instead of, a lot of them will be like, sometimes she just talks at me instead of to me or with me. And it's because it is because the guys aren't responding, I think. They're just going, right. So of course the partner is going to keep talking.
Right. I call it still face, right? And you can look up a video. I think I've talked about it before, but look it up on YouTube. Still face experiment with Ed Tronick. And it's a quick little video, but it shows the research that they were doing with children and their parents. And they would basically do two different scenarios. One where the parent was very engaged and very nurturing and just interacting with the child. And then they do another one where the parent takes on a still face, no expression, and stares at the baby for 2 minutes. And I'm telling you, this is an uncomfortable video to watch. Okay. But most people are like, oh, make it stop. And you watch it and you see the baby go into distress. Well, we're the same way as adults, right? If somebody doesn't give us any response, we go into a panic response. It's hardwired into us that if we don't get the response, the nurture, the engagement that we need, we panic, we freak out. Our bodies like physically hurt and contort. And so I would encourage you guys to check it out. And I'm going to be anybody who's a withdraw or anybody who's a pursuer, watch that video. And you can be an addict. I hate to use that word. You can be somebody who struggles with an addiction. You can be somebody who's been betrayed. And you might be somebody who does the still face, right? I don't want to make it like, I don't want to make it stereotypical and say that the only person who does a still face is somebody who's struggled with addiction. I've worked with lots of betrayed partners who do a still face, and they've learned it throughout their life as a method of survival, honestly. But it causes the other person to just have total distress. but watch the video and ask yourself, can I relate to that baby? Right? Can I, I'm sorry that I laugh at the question that just came through the second part. I'll explain in a second, but watch the video and see if you can relate to that. Like when still face happens, and if you're somebody who gives a still face, watch the video and go ask your partner, is that what's happening to you on some level? Because it's phenomenal. So hopefully it looks like you found it and you put a link to it.
Yeah, I popped a link in. It is Edtronic. God, I grew up with the queen of the still face, who's not an addict and was not a betrayed partner. She was just the queen of the still face.
Have we talked about still face before?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, seriously?
I think this is new because I would have watched that video. I'm going to watch it when we're done.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, a little bit of name envy. What kind of a name is Edtronic? Like that's the coolest name ever. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, he's got to do something like technical, or he should be like a football player. Edtronic, tight end for the Cleveland or whatever. Yeah, no, my mother's the queen of the still face, and actually getting a reaction from her when she gives a reaction, she actually looks really uncomfortable when she smiles. It's like this thing where it's like she's forcing her face, like pictures of her. She looks like somebody stuck her with the cattle prod because she's trying to smile. And I love my mother, and she's not a horrible person or even a dour person. She's just emotionally absent. And, she doesn't want to be hit with anybody else's drama or trauma. It makes her too uncomfortable.
Oh, totally.
And I inherited that. So, yeah.
Right. And that typically, like you look at it, there's a couple of different types of emotional tolerance. We can be tolerant, we can be intolerant or tolerant to other people's emotions. Like if we have a low tolerance to other people's emotions, we might give a still face. It could also be because we have a low tolerance for our own emotions. And what we do is we just go flat. We just go still face. And so there's different reasons why it might occur, but it really is like a survival technique, a survival mechanism. I've seen women, I say this, I'm sure it happens to men too, but like you see women who maybe are abandoned and, single moms and they're overwhelmed. They're providing financially. Their kids are constantly like pulling at them for attention and affection and love. And like literally like they're in survival and all they can give is like basic necessities and still face. Because if they let those emotions out, they're a disaster, at least in their mind, right? And I've seen it just be so common in any of our trauma or betrayal survivalists, you might see this. So there are times where you're just super flat, super still, and it's just survival. Like it's not a negative connotation in the sense of like there's something wrong with you, but it has to be practiced. Otherwise, it can really affect our relationships.
So this is like a kind of mirrors a personality type where it develops really early in life, or is it a trauma response or a neglect response, or do we get it later in life or all over?
I mean, I think I would probably, okay, so I'm just going to throw this out. Why exactly still face occurs, I will say I don't exactly know. Like I haven't done a bunch of studying on it to figure out its development personally. So I'll throw out that caveat and I'll tell you that from what I've seen, it's either somebody didn't get affection and didn't get connection at home. Maybe their parents were still faced in a way. And so they've just learned this is just how to interact. This is what I was taught. So they learn from their parents to just be flat, still faced, and that's how I interact with people. And then you have some people who might be more of the, like they've had trauma happen to them, they've had betrayal happen, they're overwhelmed with emotion, and they go flat just because it's either that or have a nervous breakdown almost, right? Like completely fall apart. And so I think there's probably various reasons why it can occur, but I don't think that it's just you learned it from childhood and you either have it or you don't. I think any of us can go into an anxiety space, a depressive state. Any of us can have a still face once in a while. In fact, I think I do still face all the time. If I'm at home numbing out on some news article or watching a video, that's a still face when my kid comes in the room. Dad, dad, dad. I was in the store yesterday, and I don't know why, but the grocery store near me does not put the pitas with the bread. In my head, it deserves to be with the bread. No, it's in some other random spot in the store. And so I'm like looking up on the app trying to find it. And my kid was like, Dad, Dad. And I'm like, and he's like, Dad, you're not listening to me. And I'm like, you're right. I'm not. And to my kid, that's a moment of distress. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm trying to find the pitas and I'm frustrated. Hey, let me put this aside and let's talk for a second. What's going on? Right? Like I had to go, the store doesn't matter. The pitas don't matter. So we have to realize still face can happen even to the healthy of us in any moment, just because we're distracted or maybe numbing out on our phones or watching TV. Other people are still going to see it as we're just flat and disconnected.
I am so tempted to give you a still face for the next 35 minutes just to see how much distress I can put you in, but I don't think I can do it, so I'm not going to try. Just to see if your hair starts falling out.
There is a part of me that has always wondered if you would be a good supervillain, and like I swear, I now know it is in you.
I was told once that I look like who's the supervillain who killed everybody in the DC movies, Marvel Comics movies?
You're talking? Is it Kingpin?
No.
Thanos.
Thanos. Yeah, I was told once I look like Thanos by like a 6-year-old, and I was like, okay, great. You look at me and see Thanos. Lovely.
He's a little bit more purple than you are, but
yeah, a little bit more purple and a little bit bigger and better looking.
I don't know. Okay.
All right, let's get to questions. As a sex addict, I find myself battling what my reaction would be when operating as an addict. Now I shut down my reaction when my wife makes comments that warrant a response. My silence in those moments triggers her. Yeah. Is my struggle in this moment normal? Is there a way I can more readily reply in a way that acknowledges her, but doesn't lead me down a path of wanting to defend myself or attack her out of my fear? And then it says, as someone who struggles with an addiction. Is that the part that made you laugh?
It did, because it starts off as a sex addict, and then I had made a comment about, sorry, I try not to use the label somebody as an addict. I say as a person who struggles with addiction, and so then it was put in there, and it made me giggle.
All right.
But okay, so I'm going to go back through the question. So you find yourself battling with your reaction would be when operating as an addict. What is that?
I find myself battling what my reaction would be when operating. I'm not sure what that means, but I think this person is now sober and just shuts down when right? And just
okay.
Still face when confronted.
Yeah. It's super tough because it's really interesting, because there's certain behaviors that, let's say if you're struggling with sex addiction, when you're struggling with the addiction, oftentimes our behaviors can be really erratic. They can be really intense. They can be lots of blaming and defensiveness. And the hard part is, as you get sober, sometimes the act of sobriety puts you into a very similar state of defensiveness and frustration. And a lot of times I'll push those who are working on their addiction, like, it's a pretty good chance that your self-care might be struggling, right? That you might be on the side of white knuckling it a bit. And so I always tell people, like, hey, check your self-care in. Now, in addition to that, the more we get sober, the more often our shame starts to be exposed, right? The more we start to see all of that shame start to come to the surface. When we know that one of the biggest things that stops empathy or connection happening from two people is one person's shame. And so the best thing you can do at a minimum is to stop and acknowledge, hey, I'm feeling shame and I'm wanting to defend myself. I want to attack you out of my fear. So like what you wrote there is what you want to talk about. The trick for you and I is to not go there without thinking. So it's far better for us to say, okay, I'm overwhelmed. I really want to defend myself right now. And I'm struggling because everything inside of me wants to attack you because my fear is coming up. Now, what stinks is usually when we do that, we distract from our partner, in this case, her, actually what she brought to begin with. And what stinks is that she'll often say, great, you always make it about you. And the truth is, if we're in our shame and we're shutting down and we're getting defensive, we are always making it about us. And we're learning not to do that. And so you could actually say, at the risk of you feeling like I'm making it all about me, I'm about to make it all about me, that I'm shutting down and I can't show up for you the way you need me right now. Like it sounds a little strange, but like that's like the best thing you could do in the moment is actually honor her, how intense and crazy that cycle feels for her, while at the same time being true to yourself. Now, as you do that more and more, you're going to feel yourself more able to calm or slow that down so that you can show up for her and walk through her triggers, walk through her fears with her. I mean, if you can do that now, fantastic. Do it with her right away. Do not delay. She deserves it. But being realistic, it's going to take you a lot of practice and time to figure that out. Do you feel like I answered that well enough, Scott?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that struggle in the moment is normal to answer that part. I do a support group for alumni of our treatment center and work groups on Monday night, and it's all married straight guys, all of them. And every week, at least half of them come in and they have either, their wife said something to them and they got really defensive and just went into defensive mode, which is a bad idea, or they shut down like this. They just shut down. They go into still face. I'm loving this term. and either way, their wife gets more upset because either of those responses, the wife is not feeling heard. She's not feeling understood. She's not feeling seen or listened to. And most of the time, the betrayed partner just wants to be heard and acknowledged, I think. And I mean, that's half the battle is just.
Oh my gosh. I swear most of the world's problems could be solved if someone that we want to listen to us would just hear us. They don't have to agree, but just hear me out. Like just listen and let me know that you hear me. But yeah, we go to this defensive place and we get mad that they feel that way rather than just going, well, I mean, I wouldn't say this, but I've had thoughts where I'm like, I don't agree with you, but your feelings are valid. Your thoughts are valid. And so let me hear you out. And so, yeah, I swear so many problems, but when somebody's struggling with an addiction, they are so egocentric and it takes a lot of work on their part to get out of that space. It's one of the things I hate when I'm working with betrayed partners is to be like, hey, guess what? You're struggling. A partner that has the addiction is going to take even longer to get out of this egocentric state before they can show up for you. And I'm pained to tell you this, but keep plugging along. I mean, ugh.
Yeah, and I love that you gave so many options of responses to these situations because they happen all the time. And I love that you gave some responses that the partners can pause and say, what is that like for you to hear that? But also some ways for the withdrawer to say, okay, I think I heard you say this. You know, can you tell me more? These are really useful tools in the moment. I mean, I've had guys write these things down and like put it in your pocket, pull it out, read it.
I'm doing a couples group, and I just recently told my couples group I'm working on a set of like cards. People will joke with me. They're like, do you have a mat?
Give them some flashcards.
Yeah, they're like, do you have a Matt app so that I can pull it out and say, what would Matt say? And I'm like, I do not. Sorry. But like, I'm trying to prepare these cards that are like, I just shared and my partner is not responding. What do I do? And it's like, flip it over. What did you hear me just say?
And I'm telling you, Matt, we're going to market relationship flashcards. Everybody put your order in for Christmas now.
I'm working on it. I don't know how quick.
So, yeah, I mean, and you're an expert in EFT, and EFT is all about kind of slowing it down and making sure I hear you and you hear me. I mean, there's a whole like super slow process. Can you explain that real quick? Like how you have the conversation, you know?
Well, the toughest part about it is most of us, when we get into conflict, is we have the wrong idea of what the outcome of conflict should be. We think the outcome of conflict should be like fixing this problem, right? So if I go to my spouse and I say, hey, I'm upset, I've been trying to reach out to you, I've been trying to call you and you haven't been answering, and she thinks, in my case, right, she says to me, you know what, I was really busy with running kids around, or I was really busy, I was on the phone with a client, whatever, right? Like, she might want to defend herself, and she thinks that the outcome is explaining herself so that I'm not upset anymore, right? And in EFT, it actually does something totally, what would almost be bizarre, but it makes so much sense. Let's talk about how and why we aren't connected right now, right? And so if I can go to her and say, hey, I was trying to reach you. I'm really worried about this issue with our kid, and I felt like we needed to talk about it before I get home. And I wasn't able to get a hold of you. And when I can't get a hold of you, I start to get scared that you're ignoring me or you're mad at me. Okay. I'm just making that up. Right. But what I'm doing is I'm talking about what's driving me. I'm talking about the underlying needs that I have, and I'm telling her what's happening and how it's affecting me. But nobody usually does arguments that way. Hey, I want to share with you that I'm upset, but I'm worried if I share with you that I'm upset, that you're going to get defensive. Well, if you did share with me you're upset, I'd probably get defensive, but I don't want to get defensive, because if I get defensive, then you're going to be hurt, and I don't want to hurt you. Like, if we could actually have those conversations, we'd be like, oh my gosh, you love me, right? What EFT does is it teaches us to understand the patterns that are actually driving these disconnection moments. So the reason you have to slow it down is because we're so used to reacting quickly that we don't stop to think, what is actually happening right now? Like, why is my response having this response in my partner? And then we get curious about that. And so I tell people, forget about the content. It's not about the gallon of milk that I forgot at the store. You're mad about me not getting that gallon of milk, but you're actually upset because when I forget things like the gallon of milk, it feels like I don't care about you. And I forget things a lot. So it feels like I don't care about you a lot. And that's a terrible feeling to have. Let's connect. then we can worry about the content, and we can actually solve all sorts of content problems. So I hope this gives like a really brief summary of how that works.
And I'm always impressed because I go to the feeling, and you always go to the underlying need that drives the feeling. You go that one layer deeper, which I always forget about.
Right.
And emotionally focused therapy, you got to get deeper.
Yeah, it really is. You get to this deeper place, but we also have to be compassionate on ourselves, right? If we don't have a history of understanding our emotions, understanding our needs, it's always interesting. People tell me all the time, I don't have any needs, or I don't know what my needs are. And it's like, you have needs constantly. We all do. Do you pay attention to the things that pull at you that is a need, right? And starting to learn what our needs are. Sometimes I'll tell people, try making a gratitude list just to see the things you're grateful for, because the things you're grateful for are likely needs that have been fulfilled. So we have to get to that deeper space where we can understand, okay, you're feeling scared. What's going on with the scared feeling? How do I get a little bit deeper to understand that? And how can I show up with you with understanding and empathy? In fact, most of the time, I'm not even going to solve it. I'm just going to look at it with you. And if I can hold that space, usually we go, oh, that feels really good.
Yeah. And, I'm a withdrawer, and I tend to present as needless and wantless, even though I'm not. And is that normal for withdrawers to sort of just act like we have no needs and just accept to be left alone?
I think it can be normal, just as normal for a pursuer as well. A lot of pursuers, and again, I'm just going to throw out an idea here. A lot of pursuers are needless and wantless, and sometimes they're needless and wantless just by how, I want to use the word aggressive, but I mean no negative connotation by it, but just by how aggressive or active or intentional that they are, or proactive that they are in helping other people meet their needs. And so I've seen pursuers be needless and wantless, and in their mind, well, if I can help everybody else, all my needs get met. But it almost appears needless and wantless because they're constantly showing up for everybody else. So needless and wantless, I think, can show up in multiple ways. We can withdraw and just disconnect and be like, I don't trust anyone to show up for me. Or we can engage so much that we try to give to everybody else that, oh, I don't need people to show up for me. Let me just show up for everybody else.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Questions. So my sex addict husband, supposedly 18 months abstinent, but no other forms of recovery, responds with that still face and won't even look at me if I ask any personal questions. Now I know why that makes me go into panic mode. I almost go mad. Could he be doing it on purpose because he likes to see me that way?
So there's a lot going on here, even in the word supposedly, right? Supposedly 18 months abstinent, right? There's a lot of fear and a lot of worry and concern coming up for you. And I'm glad that it sounds like the still face, it gives you some understanding of why you're in panic. Hopefully that helps you feel less crazy, because you're not crazy because you're going into a still face. In fact, it shows how much you care about him. The fact that we go into a panic place shows that we desire and long for connection. And so, could he be doing it on purpose? Sure. Let's play with it for a moment. I'm going to go both directions on this one. I'm going to say, okay, he's doing it on purpose. There's a couple of reasons why he could be doing it. In fact, there's probably lots more reasons than I could suggest. But let's say he's doing it on purpose because he learned that the only way to feel cared about is to watch somebody else panic for his, I want to say attention, but panic for his attachment, right? Panic for his, for nurturing or whatever, right? And so he could be doing it on purpose in that regard. Let's go a little bit more maniacal. He could be doing it on purpose because he likes to watch other people suffer, right? I don't like to live in the idea that there's a whole lot of people out there that do it that way. When you talk about doing it on purpose, it's as if he's saying, I like watching you go mad, right? Because you said because he likes seeing me that way. If I were to say he's doing it on purpose, I like to think, you know what? It's more of something he does because it helps him realize you still care. It's just a really unhealthy way of doing it. Let's go to the sense that he's not doing it on purpose. A lot of the times when I have somebody struggling with addiction, they have so much shame inside of them, even if they're narcissistic, right? Even if you have a true narcissist, they're full of so much shame. They shut down and disconnect just because they have no shame management skills. They have no shame resiliency. And so I would argue that for most people, that still face, when I help people unpack it, sometimes they're so terrified of having the wrong response. They feel like no response is better than being wrong. No response is better than failing, not realizing that failure would actually look better. Or failure might be them saying, well, if I give any response, it's going to get wrong. And then I'm going to be defensive. And then I'm yelling. And so a lack of conflict is better than no conflict. Again, are any of these thought processes healthy that I'm throwing out? No. But when you ask the question, could he be doing it on purpose? Sure. It's always possible. I think I would struggle personally to believe that my spouse is doing it on purpose, because that's a frustrating, scary place to live. If I felt like they were doing it on purpose, I'd probably try and look at the more gracious assumption that maybe this is his way of feeling loved. It's just a gross way, if that makes sense. Scott, what else should we throw out there on that?
I mean, what I'm hearing, and I guess I'm just inserting myself into why I tend to do still face sometimes. Still face, the same as stonewalling. I'll let Matt handle that in a second. I do not like to feel emotionally activated. This is why I became an addict. I didn't want to have strong feelings. I couldn't deal with strong feelings. Nobody ever helped me regulate my strong feelings. So what I did was I just didn't have them. I discovered alcohol early. I discovered drugs early. I discovered masturbation and other sexual behavior early. And that was how I escaped. And before that, I escaped into like books and fantasy games and, all kinds of things. I mean, I was behaving like an addict when I was 7 or 8 years old because I didn't want to feel anything. I didn't ever want to feel uncomfortable. And who can make me more uncomfortable than the person I love? If they're struggling with me, if they're a little upset with me, who can make me more uncomfortable than my wife or my spouse or my partner? And I can go into a shutdown mode. It's almost the fight, flies, freeze reaction where we freeze because it's all we can manage is to just go and freeze. I can remember when I went away to college, one of my friends told me, a close friend, that he had been molested as like a 15, 16-year-old kid. And I was sitting there going, why are you telling me this? I couldn't handle it. And I know that I didn't meet his need to be heard and acknowledged and validated and have some empathy. I couldn't give it to him. And I wanted to. I knew even at the time, I am not responding in the correct way here. Because I just couldn't handle it. I was not capable.
Right.
A lot of recovery has helped with that.
Yeah. And it's sad because the truth is, even if you couldn't handle it, he was desperately trying to get connection with you, which was a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And so it's amazing. But at the same time, you wished you could have, and you just did not have the skill set. Now, does that mean that he shouldn't feel, let's say, traumatized by being vulnerable and you not responding? No, it would be normal to be that vulnerable and share such a powerful thing and have your response be so inadequate that he may never share it again. Sorry, does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And this is one of the moments that I have real shame about, even now, even after making an amends.
Which is interesting that you say that, because I get it, right? We all have shame, but it's like the reality of it is like, again, you and I, we can only show up what we know. And so you're right though. I have moments like that too, where I look back and go, man, I wish I would have known different. We all have those moments.
Yeah. And so yeah, there's, like Matt said, there's 100 reasons why somebody could be giving the still face. And
So,
some of them are evil and some of them are just pure terror.
oh yeah, pure terror on their part. And what I really, if I'm trying to push more than anything, if we understand what's going on, it might help us to hang on a little longer, in a sense of trying to have hope. But obviously, if it's not working, right, it doesn't mean you need to hang on in the relationship. But if we understand more about these interactions and why they're happening, it can help us to maybe not go down a negative spiral as far. So
I'm sitting here thinking, if my friend had only looked at me and said, you know, what did you hear me just say? Or what is it like for you to hear me say that? We could have actually maybe had the conversation that needed to happen.
Well,
and he didn't have that skill, and I didn't have that skill.
It's funny because let's say he had that skill, and I don't expect him to be able to have had that, right? Like, if he had said that,
kids, I mean, come on.
How old?
We were 19 at that point. We were freshmen in college.
But let's say he were, even if you were to have said, honestly, I am so overwhelmed that happened to you, I don't even know how to respond. Sometimes that response is so affirming because it's like, yeah, what happened to me is that terrible that it blows my friend out of the water, right? Like, even just you being honest, honestly, that's so overwhelming to hear. Now, he could internalize it differently as well, but even being able to show up with that, I am just so overwhelmed. It could have been very healing for him, but neither one of you had that skill. So now you learn. So I'll throw it out. There was a comment in the chat. If you want to trade, shoot me an email. We can talk about it. Okay. The next thing in the chat was talking about me comparing a busy mom to not answering a husband's phone call. And comparing that to a sex addict husband gaslighting and lying. Yeah, I will freely admit that sometimes my illustrations, although it is in my heart and my attempt to try and get in the right, like to try and break it down in a more simplistic scenario to explain certain things, that it doesn't always land exactly probably where I would want it to. But absolutely, like if I need to clarify or go into that more, or if you want to throw out a question that would relate more to that scenario, let's absolutely do it.
And then just to acknowledge, Matt and I are both very aware that nothing hurts worse than intimate betrayal.
Oh my God.
The person you love and trust and expect never to harm you, and they just stab you in the back, and then they twisted the knife, and then they shoved it deeper and twisted it again. I mean, nothing hurts like that. And we're both aware of that, and sometimes it's easier to give an example that's not quite so knife twisty.
Yeah, to be honest, there's a lot of times that I will actually give examples that are, there are a lot of examples that I give that are a little bit like trying to figure out how to explain this. If I give super heavy examples all the time, sometimes that will shut a person down to not even be able to hear because it brings up such heavy emotion. And so, in fact, I had that happen this week. I was working with somebody and I stopped and I said, hey, what did you hear this person just say? What did you hear your spouse just say? And it was interesting. They said, I'm still stuck 10 minutes ago when you said this. And I was a little blown away. I didn't realize that what I had shared had impacted them so heavily but I was letting the spouse continue to work through whatever that needed to be done. And I was like, whoa. And so to be honest, there are times that I definitely will use lighter examples to try and illustrate a principle, because I know, start talking about sexual abuse, for instance, that can put somebody in a pretty rough place and they're shut off. But I'm willing to go heavy, and I'm willing to jump in. So if you guys need it to be applied a little bit more deeply, hit me up. Okay.
Do your thing. Is still face the same as stonewalling?
So stonewalling, that's a great question. I think when I think of still face, I actually think of still face. I think stonewalling, okay, this is totally my judgment and my opinion, okay? I don't have, as far as research goes or whatever. When I think of stonewalling, there is an intention in stonewalling. The intention is to shut myself off and disconnect from you. And there's an intention there where I think still face can be stonewalling, but sometimes, maybe even a lot of times, still face isn't stonewalling when it's the person just shut down and flat. They are just in this catatonic fear. If that makes any sense. So
that is exactly what I was thinking. Like it's an emotional shutdown, usually with still face. Whereas stonewalling is something intentional. You're asking me a question and I'm purposefully stonewalling you. I'm not giving you, purposefully not answering, even though I'm perfectly capable, usually. Whereas still face, I think, for me, still face is just that abject terror of, oh, you're going to leave me, or you hate me now, or whatever I say is going to be wrong, or my shame is kicking in, or all of that. And it just like shuts me down emotionally.
Right.
Freeze.
Right. Stonewalling, I would argue, maybe has a little bit more of an intention, or it's more intentional perhaps. Whereas still face, I think, can be stonewalling, but I think it generally is just, like you said, that freeze response.
Yeah, I love this last comment we got here. Says that we go easy on people who struggle with addiction.
No, I love it. Well, no, actually, nice, no, Scott, hold up. Yeah. Hold up. Before you go, I'm going to use this as an opportunity, and I may be wrong here, but perhaps the way you responded there was defensive. You said, no, we don't. Right. And the reality of it is, to the person who said this, you go easy on people with that struggle with addiction. The reality of it is that's your experience. As you have watched my webinars, it probably feels to you like I do go easy on them. I would be interested to hear from other people if they feel, I would be interested to hear if other people feel that way, because I'm not afraid to take a look at it. If that were the case, I'll tell you a little bit about my approach and why I take it. My goal when I'm working with couples is to get both people to connect. And what I've found is, do I sometimes work with people struggling with addiction with kid gloves? Yeah, sometimes I absolutely do. And the reason is this, because emotionally, oftentimes they're still children. And if I'm going to get them to heal, and I'm going to get them to grow up to be emotionally an adult, I can't just go in and pound them with my shame hammer and shut them down. So there's this really careful balance where I need to be compassionate and understand why they struggle and help lift them out of there. But most people that work with me don't tell me I go easy on them, right? Most people that work with me, actually, I say the biggest complaint I get is that I go too hard on people, but I go just as hard on my partners, the betrayed partners, as I do on people struggling with addiction. Because in my opinion, if somebody's going to take the time to work with me, they want me to get into it and help them heal as quickly as possible. So I think there's been a lot of times where I have to, where I have to try and weigh that balance. How do I help to not trigger the shame, but we're going to trigger the shame. I mean, the reality of it is you're going to trigger it no matter what you do, if that makes any sense. And then we have to work through that cycle. So there is a balance, and I'm totally open to it. If you guys feel I'm going easy, let's talk about it. But at the same time, thank you for sharing. I'm totally willing to take a look at it. Call me out. I can totally handle it. And I want to honor that I have a great love in my heart for betrayed partners and people that struggle with addiction. They are just as worthy of love. And it's trying to figure out how to honor both in their recovery process. It isn't always easy, but I really appreciate you guys showing up and just getting messy here. I think it's great.
Yeah. And, you know, the guys will, mine don't tell me I'm being too hard, but they say, God, you never let me get away with anything. You know, I'm just like, no, you're lying to me. You know, I'll just call them out. So anyway, yeah, I mean, but I love addicts. I am an addict. So this last question is kind of, well, I'm just going to read it, and Matt, you can answer real quickly. Follow-up question. When he says something hurtful, should I just ignore it? Or, you know, how do I keep from getting a still face?
Oh, gosh.
And this is kind of what, but this is what we talked about earlier. Pause and say, what is it like to hear me say that? You know?
Yeah. You know, the hardest part is, right, you say, should I just try to ignore it? I think that's impossible. I don't think we can ignore it, right? So it all depends. I know for me, if I don't feel like my partner's in a place that they can show up for me, then I can't ignore it. I'm going to reach out immediately and get support from somebody who can help me in my wound. And then, so I know, or I might lean back in and I might just say something as simple as, you know, it's really hurtful to hear that. It's like, and then I'm just going to let them know I'm hurt. And then I might not want to get any more vulnerable right now, right? That I'm not going to continue to get vulnerable if it keeps hurting. And then the next thing you said, not try to find out why he treated me that way. I actually think it's great. If you can hold that space, you can try and find out. It's so painful in that moment because you've been vulnerable. He's treating you poorly, and now you're trying to show up for him. If you can do it, I think it's great. I mean, you're trying to show up for you because you're trying to figure out, why did he treat me this way? So do it if you can. How do I keep from getting a still face? Honestly, practice. And when I say practice, it's not your job to keep him from giving you a still face. It's his job to do recovery so that he can learn not to give a still face. The responsibility for him not giving you a still face is on him, not you. And so don't get wrapped up in this concept of like, I've got to figure out how to prevent him from giving the still face. I might be able to change some of my behaviors. I might be able to change some of the things I'm saying, or some of the things, or repeat how I'm hearing things. But the truth is, if he hasn't done his work, he's going to give you still face, no matter how good you are, or how well you're healing, or how hard you're trying. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully that answers that.
Thank you, Matt. Cool topic today. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I will get this posted on our YouTube channel as soon as I can. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Yeah, be well and have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. You guys are awesome. See you soon.